Legend of Total War here, and today we've got a tier list using Tier Maker, this time covering an old world race, the Dwarfs. So, just like in the previous tier lists that we've done, we're basing this rating on Legendary Difficulty Campaign, Very Hard Battle Difficulty, based on Ultra Unit Scale, with no mods and no multiplayer. So, my experience playing Dwarfs might be different from what you found. Maybe there's units that I'm going to put fairly low down that you think are actually quite good. So my answers here are not the definitive, this is definitely the way you should play, but this is based on my personal opinion. So if you disagree with me, that's totally fine. But do let me know why you disagree in the comments below with any of these choices. Now, in terms of how we're going to organize this, melee infantry first, check on the timeline to see what you want to look at specifically. Melee infantry first, then missile infantry, then gyrocopters, and then artillery last. Okay, so melee infantry. One big difference you're going to see with this tier list is that because the Dwarfs basically need their melee infantry, unlike other races, we're not going to see as much trash melee infantry as we've seen in, like, for example, the Dark Elves. So, let's get to it. Now, first up is the most basic unit, the Miner. This is a unit that doesn't require a barracks to recruit. You just need to not have a ruin in the settlement that you've got. And I think it's a C tier unit, at least relative to the Dwarf roster. The main benefit of this unit is its convenience to recruit. It's got decent armor, it does have armor piercing, but it's got very low melee attack. So it's not likely going to hit very often. They are definitely the weakest of the Dwarf units. It largely comes down to the only reason that you would recruit this unit is because you have no other options, and they're reasonably good until you need to hire something else. Now, next one, we've got the Blasting Charges Miner, and this one here I'm going to put at B tier. I probably would have put it at C tier a couple of months ago, but since they used to require 2 buildings and now they only require the base military building, I'm going to put it at B tier because they're a lot more convenient to recruit now, and they have significantly more killing power than regular miners just because of those blasting charges. Now, they get 3 shots of it, and those 3 shots have the potential to wipe out an entire unit of gobos or orc boys. Very useful in the early stage of the campaign. It's always good to have a missile attack on your melee unit, although there's very few units in the game that have that, just because if they're able to win or dish out damage without taking absurd numbers of casualties, then that's really beneficial for when you have to fight multiple battles in quick succession, which is, again, one of the reasons that melee infantry really falter. It's very difficult for melee infantry and very hard battle difficulty to win a battle having done their worth and not get completely wrecked in the result, whereas missile units can most of the time walk out of the battle with very few casualties because their damage dealing is replenished straight away in terms of their ammunition. So I'm going to put that at B tier. Next up come the Dwarf Warriors. Now, another thing that's really important with the Dwarfs is the role of each unit that they play in the army. It's not just a case of high stats equal higher up on the placement. The role of any particular unit is more important than their stats. So, in terms of the 2 Dwarf Warrior units here, I'm going to put the Dwarf Warriors with shields at B tier, and the Dwarf Warriors with great weapons at C tier. Now, you might think that's a little bit backwards because this is supposed to be a more expensive unit, better unit, has higher damage dealing, but again, it comes down to the preferred role on very hard battle difficulty. The truth of the matter is, melee infantry are very rarely going to deliver enough value for you to win an even matched battle anyway, even if you work your guts out. So having high melee attack or higher melee attack and some armor piercing is of lower value than a shield, which allows you to block a lot of the missile damage that's coming at you, and also high melee defense. Melee defense is more valuable for the Dwarfs because that means more staying power. The longer they can hold the enemy back and allow the units that can actually kill the enemy, being your missile units and artillery, the better. So you really want to be going for that high melee defense. The only reason why you wouldn't want high melee defense is if you're not going any missile units at all, and that is, in my opinion, not a great way to play the Dwarfs. But again, play however you want. But I think that missile units are the backbone of their, specifically artillery, the backbone of their armies. Now, after the Dwarf Warriors, we've got the Longbeards. Now, I'm going to put them in the same sort of category here, in that the ones with shields are going to be at B tier, and the ones that are great weapons at C tier. Now you might think, but these are a higher tier unit. Surely they should be looking like this, right? Well, no, because as you go up in tier, you're getting them later on. So these are tier 3, whereas opposed to these being tier 1. You'd be able to get them really early. They're also significantly more expensive. So yes, they are better in terms of stats, but in terms of when you're recruiting them, their performance is basically the same. So if you're going up against Orc boys, right, then these guys are fine to hold the line. But by the time you get these, you're going to be going up against Biggins or even Black Orcs, in which case they're going to be just fine. And they're going to hold for about the same amount of time as Dwarf Warriors. By that point, of course, you're going to want to phase these guys out completely. And so in terms of their actual performance at that tier, they're pretty much identical to Dwarf Warriors. Okay, then we've got the Slayers. So I've taken a big steaming dump all over Slayers throughout the entirety of Total War Warhammer, and that's largely due to their role. I don't find them good in a missile-based army because of their extremely low melee defense. But that doesn't mean you can't use them, and they can be very useful now, especially because of the new Grudge system, in where you can use them as Regiment of Renown, just hire them instantly. So because of that, and because you can hire them instantly, they are actually a really good emergency unit. So I'm actually going to put Slayers at B tier, both of them. I wouldn't put them in my standing armies, with the exception of Ungrim Iron Fist, but you now have the ability to, you know, quite significantly boost Slayers, and they do dish out a lot of damage, but they don't have much staying power. So usually you just use them in a temporary situation, have them dish out some damage, they die, you just move on with your life. I wouldn't put them in my Doomstacks or in my standing armies at all. But before I probably would have put them under trash, I wouldn't put them that way now. They can be very useful in a pinch situation. Next, we've got the highest tier of the Dwarven Infantry. We've got the Hammerers and the Ironbreakers. So I'm going to talk about the Ironbreakers first. These are A tier. This is the best infantry unit in the game. Just about, okay? This is, so far, the only melee infantry unit that's reached the A tier. In fact, very few in the other tier lists even hit B tier, right? Now, the reason why the Ironbreakers are getting an A tier, now this is a tier 4 unit, is because for the role that it performs for the dwarfs, it fits perfectly. It has extremely high melee defense, it has a missile attack, they have a shield, they are almost unbreakable. This is a very reliable unit. So within its class, being melee infantry, this is a really, really effective unit. And the great thing about it as well is that it actually dishes out a decent amount of damage as well. Highly, highly recommend that if you're going to use melee infantry, gravitate towards the Ironbreaker. Very reliable, very easy unit to use. Won't let you down except against like vortex spells that just annihilate it straight away, or going up against monsters which will just break right through them. Their high mass make cavalry just about impossible to punch through. Other melee infantry just will not be able to get through them. Even units such as like Swordmasters of Hoeth or Hargoneth Executioners are going to take forever trying to kill them. And the longer they take, the more time you've got your missile units to dish out damage. These guys here will buy you the time that you need to win. Very good unit. Okay, and then we've got the Hammerer here. Now this one here is basically the opposite, and it's going into C tier, because while it does dish out a lot of damage, it doesn't last anywhere near as long as an Ironbreaker. So the dwarf infantry roster, it really comes down to shields or damage. And the thing is, based on very high battle difficulty, high melee defense is vastly more useful than high melee attack. And while you can get these guys here to do a lot of damage, you're trading off that damage too quickly. You want to slow down the pace of the battle, give your missile units enough time to do the job that they need to do, which is why they're not really appropriate. Maybe doing a combination of Ironbreakers and Slayers could work, but I think it would be inferior to artillery/missile unit based armies, so that's why it's getting the C tier. I have been sent in a Hammerer Doomstack before, and it really wasn't that good. Even with loads of physical resistance, it's not really that good. Unfortunately, melee infantry that dish out damage just don't perform that well on very high battle difficulty unless they have some kind of an edge. And the fact that these guys here have a missile unit as well as being really good at holding the line gives them a big edge over the Hammerers. Alright, that's all the melee infantry, so let's start talking about missile infantry. So, let's start with the most basic. We got the Quarreler here. I'm going to put this unit at A tier. Very reliable unit, good missile damage, good amount of range. They've got shield block, good amount of armor, good leadership. They're okay in melee, but that really should be a last resort. Very reliable unit. And then we've got the one with great weapons. Now, because this one here is more expensive, and I don't... Hang on, let me just check this. Where is it? Let me just check this. Do they have shields? Yeah, see, the regular Quarrelers have shields, and these variant here don't have shields. So this one here is mainly used for, like, melee damage. If we have a look at it, 28 weapon strength as opposed to 30 weapon strength. 22 melee defense as opposed to 28. That's way more valuable. 18 melee attack as opposed to 24 melee attack. I would say that the stats overall are better for regular Quarrelers, but you're paying more for great weapons. Now, if you're paying more for an inferior unit, that actually works really badly against you, because that means that the game thinks that it's a better unit, expecting it to dish out more damage, and it doesn't, and so you actually have to end up working harder. So my recommendation is don't recruit Quarrelers with great weapon. They should actually be cheaper than the regular Quarrelers, because their stats don't fit with the dwarf roster. Melee defense is more important. So yeah, I'm gonna keep that one at B tier. It's still a good unit, don't get me wrong, but the regular Quarrelers are definitely better, in my opinion. Then we've got the Thunderer here. Now, the Thunderer doesn't have a great weapon variant, which makes it easy, because they just go to A tier. Very good unit. They don't have as much range as the Quarrelers, but they got way more missile damage, and they're better at getting rid of monsters, because projectile speed is really important for shooting fast units. So, very good unit. I definitely wouldn't put it on Doomstack. I think there's issues with that. They need forces to hold the line for them. They can't just eradicate enemy forces on their own. Same sort of thing with Quarrelers. So I think this is a really reliable unit, and it belongs in A tier. It's looking very different from other unit rosters so far that we've done. Okay, then we're going to talk about Rangers. Alright, so we've got the regular Ranger here. I'm going to put this at A tier. Really good unit. The only downside to a Ranger as opposed to a Quarreler is that it has lower ammunition. So if I show that, okay, if we have a look at the Quarreler unit, it has 22 shots. But if we have a look at a Ranger, it is a tier 1 unit, which is definitely good, but it only has 18 shots, which means it's got 4 less missile damage. Well, actually 4 less shots, so there's a lot less damage potential. But the fact that it stalks is really useful. If you're going to go Rangers, this is the kind of unit that you can spam. A little bit tricky to use, though, in that sort of category, because if you get caught, you're in big trouble. But they can be very valuable, so I'm going to keep it at A tier there. But yeah, for a tier 1 unit, very good. A tier for sure. Okay, then we've got the ones with great weapons. Now, here's the thing with this. I'm going to put it at C tier, because their low range is really works against them. Yes, they do more damage. They also don't have much ammunition, but in Total War Warhammer, having high range is extremely valuable. I would say that there is more damage potential and more potential for winning battles with the regular variant than with the great weapon variant. These low range here really does hurt them, and I'd actually put them lower tier than a melee infantry, which is rare. It's not to say that you can't get a lot of damage out of them, but you've got to work a lot harder for it. So these ones here are just easier to use. And then we've got the Bugman Ranger. So this is a unit that is essentially like a Ranger. It has the same amount of ammunition. It's much better in melee. It has regen, so it can regenerate. It can't regenerate its models, but it does heal those that are still alive. They can stalk, and they can get snipe. Well, same thing with these guys here. They can get snipe as well if you put in a Thane. Now, based on this unit here, and because it's a tier 3 unit, it does take 2 turns to recruit. Doomstack. You can make a Doomstack out of Bugman Rangers, an excellent unit. You don't have to do it, and it's kind of a low tier Doomstack, but Belegar Ironhammer can make an excellent Bugman Ranger Doomstack. And the funny thing is about it is that it's really, really strong in auto resolve. I mean, insanely strong. And the thing is with dwarf players, they tend to value a lot of their armies based around auto resolve, and I kind of feel like Bugman Rangers, for their tier, perform about the best in auto resolve. So that's why they're getting the Doomstack status. You totally can make one with them. It wouldn't be like a 10 out of 10 Doomstack. It'd be like 7 or 8 at most. But yeah, very good unit. All right, then we've got the Flamethrower Iron Drake. I'm going to put this at A tier because I would never spam them in my army. I usually put 1 or maximum 2 in my army. Very good unit. Super amount of damage can be dealt out with them, but their low range means that they need to be protected. But they are a very good unit for sure. And then you've got the Trollhammer Torpedo variant, which I would also put as an A list unit. This is basically, it comes down to this: anti-infantry unit, anti-large unit. But low range, you got to keep them protected. I definitely wouldn't spam them in my army. There was a possibility before when the range buff from engineers used to stack, where the Iron Drake Trollhammer torpedoes used to be able to get them like 150 range or something, or even more than that, and that actually made them doom stackable. But since that got nerfed into oblivion, I would say that it's A tier now and no higher. Alright, now we're talking about gyrocopters. So, this is the regular gyrocopter here. I would put this one as B tier. So, it's alright, gyrocopters. This is pretty good at getting rid of enemy infantry. The biggest problem with it is that they're very easily shot out of the sky, and very easily sort of harassed away. They have absolutely no melee capabilities, and they kind of have low amounts of ammunition. So, you can do a lot of value with them, but if the enemy have any kind of flying units, you can't really use them very well. Even bats will get rid of them, so you've got to be very careful. They're really susceptible to magic, like magic missiles, and even Spirit Leech absolutely wrecks them. So good unit, like B tier is not bad, but just be careful about it. It's definitely unnecessary. In terms of the Brimstone gun, I'd actually put it in the exact same tier, because we've got the anti-infantry, and then you've got the anti-large. The Brimstone gun is primarily used for getting rid of enemy artillery, or at least like annoying the hell out of it, especially against early game greenskin ones. It's fairly good at it, but they're not amazing at it by any means. They can do the job. It's just you got to work hard to do it, and kind of ignore what your other forces are doing, which is fine, because most dwarf armies can just AFK their way to victory in most cases. So good B tier unit. Then you've got the Gyro Bomber. Now, here's the thing. I play an Ultra unit scale, and on Ultra unit scale, the Gyro Bomber is kind of crap. But if you're playing on small unit scale, this is the perfect unit that is indicative of how the unit scales are not properly balanced, because its damage output is exactly the same on small unit scale as it is on Ultra. Whereas these guys here, because they have 4 entities on Ultra unit scale and 1 entity on small, like the smaller the unit scale, it balances them out correctly, but there's always one Gyro Bomber. So since the amount of damage being dealt isn't reduced on small unit scale, it's got the same amount of ammunition, but the enemy units all have like 1/4 the amount of health. This guy here is absolutely brutal on small unit scale. So if you're playing on small unit scale, which I don't recommend and this list isn't based on, it would enter Doomstack status. But based on Ultra unit scale, it gets C tier. I would say that if you're going to play it at the most balanced, you probably want to be playing it on large unit scale, in which case it would go to B tier. But since I play on Ultra, and I recommend playing on Ultra, because I think that's the most fun experience, but again, play however you want, I'm going to be putting it at C tier. I just don't think it delivers as much value as the other ones. Okay, now, artillery. We have the Bolt Thrower. Now, here's a funny thing. Trash. That's right, a artillery piece in an artillery-based faction is getting the trash, where melee infantry is going above it. Why is that? Why is an artillery unit getting the trash? It is because this unit here is completely 100% unnecessary. It was added in DLC, and it was not needed in their roster one bit. If we have a look at it, the problem with the Bolt Thrower... Alright, where are we? Okay, it is a tier 2 unit. Okay, it is primarily anti-large. Now, at tier 2, you're unlikely to be fighting any large units, right? You're mostly going to be going up against infantry. Now, its performance on the battlefield is abysmal. If you look at the other tier 2 unit, the Grudge Thrower, this is a really good artillery piece, which we'll talk about that next. And it can just dish out way more damage at way higher value. It's got much lower range at 340 range. And while it is a little bit more expensive, the 440 range definitely makes up for it. Now the thing is, if you're just waiting to get to tier 3, at tier 3 you're likely going to be fighting monsters and cavalry and that kind of stuff, at which point you've got access to Great Cannons. And Great Cannons are vastly better than Bolt Throwers. And so Bolt Throwers are basically not needed at the early stage of the campaign, and they're not needed at tier 3. A completely superfluous, unnecessary unit. It's basically the appendix of the dwarf roster. It's like in multiplayer, I'm sure it's fine, maybe, I don't know. But it's a completely unnecessary unit. There's no reason to ever get it. Alright, now, talking about Grudge Throwers. A tier. Excellent early game artillery. Just really does its worth in pretty much all the battles. I usually put about 4 or 5 of them in my armies in the early game. I usually do phase them out, but for a tier 2 unit, this is an excellent piece of artillery. Very reliable, good for getting into sieges, good in just about all situations, except for single entities. I can't handle that. But you're not going to be dealing with single entity spams in the early stages of the campaign, so it's fine. Just be prepared to phase them out later down the track. Then you've got the Great Cannons. I'd actually put the Great Cannons as B tier, because these are finicky to use because of their accuracy. Because they've got such long range, like they'll be firing at stuff like single entities and probably missing a lot. In terms of their damage output, they're not really able to wipe out a full unit before they get close, but they are definitely a good unit. I just find that there are artillery pieces that are actually better than it for what you can do. And then we come to the Organ Gun. Now I think the Organ Gun is now it's always been a tier 4 unit, right? Yeah, no, that's right. The Flame Cannon got brought down from tier 5 to tier 4. Right, okay. So Organ Guns are tier 4, right. Alright, just want to double check that. Alright, Organ Guns. You could put them as Doomstack. This is probably one of the highest damage dealing units that you've got in your roster. This is a very reliable unit that just dishes out so much damage. It's good against infantry, it's good against single entities, it's very accurate. It does have a bit of low range, but for the amount of damage output that it has, this unit obliterates units at all ranges that it can shoot at. Very accurate, very reliable unit. The only thing is I wouldn't spam them. So does that mean that they should be in a Doomstack? Yes. Just because I wouldn't spam them doesn't mean they shouldn't go in the Doomstack. I mean, look at the Skaven roster. The thing is, when I'm building an army that doesn't have Bugman Rangers in it, right? If I'm building it around the Organ Guns, every unit in my army is based around protecting this for as long as possible so this can dish out the damage. These are the guys that win the battles. Everybody else is just supporting the Organ Gun. So my Doomstack is really, even though I don't spam them, like, it depends what you consider spamming. I consider 4 or 5 units not necessarily spamming. I consider like 10 or more spamming. Every unit in my army is there to protect the Organ Guns so the Organ Guns can inflict 300, 400, 500 kills in every single battle. And now engineers can increase their ammunition or replenish their ammunition, making them like even more useful. Although you've got the range nerf, so it's a bit of a trade-off there. And then finally we have the Flame Cannon. Now, I like Flame Cannons. I think they're really good. They're at the same tier as the Organ Gun, but this is primarily an anti-infantry unit at tier 4 when your biggest threat is going to be monsters. So since you've got a different unit here that's at the same tier that is good against infantry, maybe not quite as good against infantry, it has longer range. So the Organ Gun has longer range than the Flame Cannon. I guess the Flame Cannon is better in sieges, but honestly, once you hit tier 4, dwarves really don't have problems with sieges, especially if you have a runesmith, if you know what I'm talking about, Rune of Wrath and Ruin. This is a good unit, but I wouldn't put it as a Doomstack. I'm going to put it as A tier. And there is the Dwarven roster. So, the thing about the dwarfs is that there are very few units at the top, and there's very few units at the bottom. The dwarf roster is one that's probably the most reliable out of any of the races in the game. And yet, they're one of the weakest races in the game, purely because they have no speed. They don't have any superpowered heroes. They don't have any superpowered monsters. Their lack of ability to Doomstack is one of their biggest weaknesses. Like, these two units here, being in the Doomstack category, it's like soft Doomstack category. It's like, it's nowhere near as good as some of the other races with what they can do. But the dwarves do have a reasonably good economy, so where other races might only afford one army, dwarves can afford 2. So that, funnily enough, you can afford a lot of armies in the late game with dwarves. So, well-rounded roster. This unit here is the only really bad unit, in my opinion. Everything else has a purpose, and I think it's a good roster for the most part. they have other problems. Their roster isn't necessarily their problem. Anyway, that's the end of this tier list. Let me know in the comments below what you think of this one. It definitely was a lot different from the other one. Seeing melee infantry up the top here at 8, well, not at the very top, but up an A tier. This is the first melee infantry unit to hit A tier. There is others that I would put under there, but that's for different rosters. Anyway, that's the end of this one here, guys. Let me know in the comments below what you think of it, and I appreciate you, and I'll see you next time, fuckers. Bye.